You know, when you walk into a grocery store, your brain is actually performing millions of microscopic calculations that you aren't even aware of.
Oh, absolutely. Like a staggering amount of math just to navigate the produce aisle.
Right. Because you don't stop and read every single ingredient label or, analyze the cellular structure of a piece of fruit just to figure out what an apple is.
No, you'd be in there for days.
Exactly. You just see the red skin, the round shape, the little stem, and your visual cortex instantly categorizes it. Boom, apple. It's a lightning fast cognitive shortcut.
And we need those. I mean, our brains are basically these highly efficient, calorie-saving categorization machines.
Hmm.
We rely heavily on quick visual cues just to navigate a world that is totally overloaded with stimuli.
Yeah, because if we had to analyze everything from first principles every time we looked at it, we literally wouldn't be able to function.
Right, we need to sort the world quickly just to survive it.
But the problem arises when you take that exact same cognitive shortcut, that deep evolutionary reliance on a quick visual label, and you apply it to a complex human being.
Yeah, that is where things get really messy.
Suddenly, this everyday efficiency turns into a profound and historically dangerous distortion. We take a biological marker, process it in a fraction of a second, and assume we've just read the entire contents of a person's character.
We convince ourselves we're seeing the whole picture when we really haven't even looked past the frame.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled you're joining us because today we are tearing down that specific distortion.
It's a big one.
It is. We're exploring the massive, often destructive gap between the biological reality of human variance, like what our DNA is actually doing, and the enormous social mythology we've built around it.
And to do this, we're looking at a phenomenal essay by D.L. Dantes titled Color, Perception, and Human Worth.
Yes, and because we can't just talk philosophy without grounding it in reality, we're also pulling directly from genetic databases and articles from the National Institutes of Health and Medline Plus.
Right, so the mission here is to essentially deconstruct how we perceive human identity. Dantes is challenging us to understand why we so frequently mistake an outward physical marker for a person's inner essence.
Because doing this with human beings isn't just a minor categorization error, like mistaking a pear for an apple.
No, it creates a massive distortion of truth, one that impacts how societies function, who gets power, and who gets marginalized.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with a foundational analogy Dantes uses early in the essay. It's the distinction between a writer and an author.
Oh, I love this part. It really is the key to unlocking the whole argument.
It really is. So Dantes proposes that a person is not a writer simply because their books sell millions of copies or because critics happen to love them.
Right. A person is a writer because they write.
Exactly. That physical act of putting words on a page is their undeniable objective essence.
The page literally bears the mark of their mind. That is the biological reality of the situation, so to speak.
But being an author, being praised, landing on a bestseller list, or even being completely ignored by the public, that is just society's perception.
The audience creates the author, the individual creates the writer.
Yes. And if we apply this framework to human identity, specifically something like skin color or any visible physical trait, skin color is just the act of writing.
It's a biological reality.
Yeah.
A fact of existence produced by melanin.
But the massive mythology we build around that color, the assumptions society makes about a person's intellect or their work ethic or moral worth, that is the author status.
It's a completely arbitrary narrative constructed by the audience looking at them.
And the distinction matters so much because, well, perception can change a person's social status, but it cannot create substance.
Right, an audience's applause or their silence doesn't actually alter the words the writer put on the page.
Yet society sees a visible trait like skin pigment and stubbornly assumes it's reading the total objective truth of a human being. The essay points out how absurd this is.
Because skin color is just one expression. It's one single outward layer shaped by the environmental demands placed on our ancestors.
Dantes writes, and I'm quoting here, "Skin color does not determine intellect."
It's such a straightforward sentence, almost aggressively simple.
But humanity has spent centuries violently struggling with this concept. We constantly let the author label overwrite the writer reality.
We do. And the result is the creation of these false, rigid hierarchies. Cultures convince themselves that some people are naturally designed to lead, and others are naturally designed only to serve.
Based on nothing more than the concentration of pigment in their epidermis.
Exactly. It's a triumph of lazy appearance over complex character.
Which brings us to a stubborn contradiction I want to push back on. Because history has exposed the lie of these hierarchies over and over again.
Oh, constantly. The brightest minds come from every conceivable background.
Right, yet the concept of racial purity remains incredibly popular. People have fought devastating wars over it, built entire empires on it, and they just cling to these neatly labeled categories of race.
It's wild.
So if actual biology completely rejects this concept, why on earth does the illusion of purity persist?
Well, Dantes argues that purity is one of the oldest illusions the human mind clings to because it offers something deeply seductive. It offers power without complexity.
Power without complexity. Wow. You don't have to think. You just put everyone in a neat little box, assign a value to the box, and suddenly the chaotic world is very easy to manage.
It totally satisfies that visual shortcut we talked about at the grocery store.
But the moment you hold that concept up to the light of actual science, it just shatters.
Completely. And this is where the NIH and Medline Plus sources really dismantle the philosophy of purity.
Yeah, let's get into the genetics of it.
So when we look at visible traits, skin color, eye color, hair texture, we're looking at what geneticists call polygenic traits.
Meaning it isn't just a single gene flipping a switch like a light bulb.
Exactly. You don't just inherit a blue gene or a black gene and call it a day. The mechanism is far more intricate than that.
Because the NIH defines a polygenic trait as one whose phenotype, the physical appearance, is influenced by the interaction of multiple genes, right?
Yes. Let's look at melanin production, which determines skin and eye color. You aren't just choosing a discrete color from a drop-down menu.
It's more like mixing paint on a massive palette.
That's a perfect way to put it. You have dozens of different genes acting as dials. They turn up or down the production of these specialized cells called melanocytes.
And those genes dictate how much pigment to produce and what specific type of pigment, which then interacts with environmental factors.
So instead of neat buckets of color, you get a continuous spectrum, a hyper-specific gradient.
Every single person is a custom blend of genetic paint that has been mixed and remixed over thousands of years.
Biology simply does not produce neat boxes. These polygenic traits are basically a living record of human adaptation.
They map out a story of migration. Humans adjusting to the ultraviolet radiation of different environments and of continuous population mixing across countless generations.
And, you don't even need to look at 1,000 years of human migration to see this paint mixing in action.
No, Dantes brings up the everyday human family, and it is the absolute perfect counter-argument.
Think about the shock people experience when they take one of those consumer DNA tests.
Oh man, yeah. You grow up thinking your family is 100% one thing. You have this neat little narrative.
And then the results come back.
Yeah.
Suddenly you discover a great-grandparent who crossed a border you knew nothing about.
Or an ancestor from a continent your family literally never discussed.
The family tree is the ultimate destroyer of categories. We see siblings born to the same parents who end up with vastly different skin tones.
Just because of how those genetic dials were randomly adjusted, one sibling might get the recessive lighter eyes and broader features,
while the other gets dark skin and completely different hair texture.
They share the exact same immediate history, but they present totally differently to the world.
And Dantes makes a vital point about this. When someone's complex appearance confuses an observer's assumptions, that confusion isn't a flaw in the person being observed.
Right, it's a flaw in the observer. The observer's mental boxes are simply too small to contain reality.
This continuous genetic surprise, this mixing, it isn't a defect in the human story. It is the human story.
Humanity has never been static. Long before modern political categories tried to slap permanent labels on everyone, people were moving.
They were trading, conquering, exploring, surviving, and building families across borders and oceans.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if our DNA has been constantly moving and mixing, then our ideas and our cultures have been doing the exact same thing.
Oh, the parallel is undeniable.
The biological mixing of human beings goes hand in hand with the intellectual mixing of our civilization.
Because humanity has never been physically stagnant, our intellect hasn't been either. Yet, just as we try to claim genetic purity, we try to claim intellectual purity.
Yeah. Dantes points out how often empires try to rewrite the historical record to claim sole credit for innovations.
A powerful nation will look at a mathematical breakthrough or a feat of engineering and say, "We invented this."
This knowledge is our exclusive possession. It proves our inherent superiority.
It's that same desperate desire for ownership, just applied to ideas instead of genetics.
But the irony is that innovation has never belonged to one demographic. It is practically impossible to isolate brilliance.
Human beings are incessant borrowers. We take a concept, we refine it, we adapt it to our needs, and then we return that knowledge back into the global stream.
I picture it like a massive, multi-generational global relay race. A foundational concept in mathematics might begin in ancient Mesopotamia.
But it doesn't stay there.
Right. It travels and gets transformed by thinkers in ancient Greece. Then it's preserved, expanded upon, and revolutionized during the Islamic Golden Age.
Before finally crossing back into Europe to ignite the Renaissance in a completely new form.
The tragedy is that pride often frames this continuous borrowing as a vulnerability.
We want to believe that true greatness means a culture achieved everything entirely in a vacuum, without any outside help.
But Dantes argues the exact opposite. This endless cycle of cultural and intellectual cross-pollination isn't a weakness to be hidden.
It is the ultimate proof of our shared humanity.
The intellect of our species is a collective inheritance.
A collective inheritance. I love that phrasing. No single group holds a monopoly on brilliance, just as no single group holds monopoly on a specific arrangement of DNA.
Civilization itself is a deeply collaborative effort.
Which brings us to a frustrating, almost tragic contradiction.
Yeah. If the hard science of polygenic inheritance proves we're physically mixed, and the sprawling history of civilization proves our intellect is incredibly collaborative, why do we still act like we can judge a person's worth based on a single glance?
Because the visual shortcut is just so deeply ingrained. And social habits built over centuries are remarkably hard to break. We frequently confuse social confidence with factual accuracy.
Dantes uses a phrase that I really want to focus on here: racial certainty. The essay calls this out as nothing more than social confidence built on partial information.
It is pure arrogance masquerading as fact.
And Dantes follows that up by saying, we rarely know the full road behind a face.
That line is so powerful.
When I read that, I immediately thought about those complex genetic gradients we were just discussing. We see the surface tension of a person's genetics.
We see the final coat of paint.
Exactly. But we are completely blind to the thousands of miles across borders and the survival stories that produce that exact combination of features.
We don't see the ocean voyages. We don't see the nights spent fleeing across borders.
Or the forgotten ancestors whose genetic echoes are still resonating in the shape of that person's jawline or the color of their eyes.
And because we are blind to the mechanics of their history, we substitute our own simplistic narrative.
We fill in the blanks with our own prejudices.
And because of this profound uncertainty, our default setting when encountering another human being should really be humility.
Dantes argues that we should respect the visible trait. We should acknowledge it as part of their lived experience and the reality of how the world treats them. But we cannot worship it.
And we certainly cannot turn it into an excuse for supremacy.
Think about what this means for you, listening right now. When you look at a coworker across the room, or someone sitting on the subway, or even when someone looks at you,
Neither of you is seeing a fixed verdict written in pigment.
you are looking at an intricate, sprawling history of human survival. And the essay makes a really strong pivot here regarding what this means for the institutions we build.
Right, because the real test of our society isn't how confidently we can categorize each other's differences.
A simple algorithm can categorize. That requires no moral effort at all.
The true measure of a society is how fairly it responds to human potential.
It's about access. It is about providing the opportunity to learn, to struggle, to build, and to contribute.
Because when human beings are actually given equal opportunity, history proves time and time again that brilliance is not owned by any one color.
What actually dictates a person's contribution is discipline, curiosity, and the willingness to grow.
Color is visible. Value is not. That is the fatal flaw in any system that tries to mathematically equate the two.
So let's look at the territory we've covered today. We started with the philosophical distinction between essence and perception.
The undeniable reality of the writer versus the social constructed status of the author.
Then we moved into the hard mechanics of biology, seeing how complex polygenic traits like skin color operate like a vast mixing palette.
Completely rejecting the tidy illusion of racial purity.
And we explored the historical reality that human civilization is a massive collaborative inheritance where ideas constantly cross borders.
Every single metric, whether it is biological or historical, shows us that the outward marker is just a fraction of the human story.
So what does this all mean? It brings us right to Dantes' ultimate conclusion. Any philosophy of supremacy, any social hierarchy built on something as superficial as pigment is structurally doomed to fail.
Because it was never built on truth. It was only ever built on a flawed, highly manipulated cognitive shortcut.
As we sit with the weight of that conclusion, I want to toss it over to you for a final thought.
Well, I want to leave everyone with a thought experiment that builds on Dante's idea that we never know the full road behind a face. Think about the sheer scale of human movement happening today.
It's massive.
Global migration and hyperconnection are occurring faster right now than at any point in the history of our species. The genetic paint palette is mixing at an unprecedented rate.
Yeah.
Given that reality, how will the very concept of racial certainty evolve for the humans living 1,000 years from now? When they look back at our current rigid little boxes and our obsession with pigment, will those categories seem as wildly archaic and mythological to them as the ancient pantheons of gods seem to us today?
That is a phenomenal question to chew on. Are we currently clinging to the equivalent of flat Earth geography when it comes to human identity?
It really makes you wonder.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you find your brain trying to use that quick visual shortcut, treating a complex human being with the same simple categorization as an apple in a grocery store, remember that you are only seeing the very end of a sprawling ancient road.
Keep questioning those narratives.
Exactly. Keep questioning the narratives you see around you, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.